The air in the hotel's presidential suite was thin, not from the altitude, but from the concentration of power. Reporters, donors, and the party's top brass were crowded together, the sound of their conversations and the clinking of ice in their glasses creating a symphony of anticipated victory. It was the night of the final poll before the last debate, and our candidate, Franklin, had just opened up an 8-point lead. An almost insurmountable margin, and I, Julia, the architect of this meteoric rise, the campaign's chief strategist, could taste victory. But it was bitter, like ash. My husband, Sean, slid up beside me, a glass of whiskey in hand, the supportive husband smile perfectly in place. To the world, he was my rock, the man who gave up his own career to manage my chaotic life, allowing me to dedicate myself body and soul to politics. To me, for the last 3 months, he had become a stranger who slept beside me. Franklin, our candidate, a man whose career I had resurrected from the ashes, stepped onto a small makeshift stage. He raised his glass. "Friends, this victory isn't mine. It's ours," he boomed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But we all know who the true general of this army is, the woman whose brilliant mind brought us here. A round of applause for the incomparable Julia." The applause exploded. Smiles, nods, pats on the back. I smiled back, a smile I had perfected over 20 years in political war rooms, a smile that revealed nothing. As they applauded, my eyes met Sean's. In his, for a split second, I didn't see pride. I saw a flicker of guilt? Or was it fear? "You did it, my love," he whispered in my ear, the hug a little too tight. "You always do." At that moment, my phone, which I had set to a specific vibration for a single contact, pulsed discreetly in my pocket. It was the confirmation I had been waiting for. The confirmation that turned my suspicions into a devastating certainty. I pulled away from him with a calculated gentleness and walked to the center of the room. I took the microphone from Franklin's hand. "Thank you all." My voice cut through the noise, silencing the room instantly. Franklin is right. Victory is near. But in politics, as in war, victory is only guaranteed when the enemy is completely neutralized. I paused, letting the sentence hang in the air. That is why, in tomorrow's debate, we will not just defend, we will attack. We will drop our October surprise, a dossier that will not only end our opponent's campaign, but will redefine what we know about him. Get ready. The show is just beginning. A roar of approval swept the room. The euphoria was palpable. My aides looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. Only I knew the truth. The dossier I had announced was not what they thought, and the enemy I planned to neutralize wasn't in the opposing campaign. He was right there, in the same room, smiling at me, with no idea that he was the true target of my October surprise. His victory toast had just become my declaration of war. My life was a series of war rooms, rooms filled with whiteboards, polling data, electoral maps, and the strong smell of coffee and adrenaline. Sean was the master of this logistics. He managed my schedule, my flights, my emails, my passwords. He was the gatekeeper to my empire, the man who filtered the world so I could focus on strategy. I called him my real-life chief of staff. It was a running joke between us. Today, the joke is on me. The first suspicion wasn't his mistake, but an excess of perfection. 3 months ago, the rival campaign, which had been making amateurish errors, suddenly got smarter. They anticipated one of our surprise attacks in a key swing state, neutralizing our message hours before we launched it. At the time, I chalked it up to coincidence, a stroke of luck. But then it happened again, and again. A small town where we planned a surprise visit would be greeted by the rival press the day before. A debate argument we tested in a secret focus group would appear in the opponent's mouth. It was as if they had a microphone in our room. I began to suspect a leak. I conducted a silent internal investigation, reviewing the access of all my senior staff. Nothing. They were all loyal, veterans of other campaigns, people who owed their careers to me. The only blind spot, the only hub that connected every spoke of information, was Sean. But the idea seemed monstrous, unthinkable. To betray the party was one thing. To betray me, his wife, the woman whose life he supposedly managed out of love, it was a villainy of a different order. Doubt, however, once planted, is like a weed. I started watching. I noticed the new designer shirts he was wearing, the expensive watch he claimed was a great online find. I noticed the long calls he would take in the garden, always moving away when I approached. He said they were vendors or event logistics. The truth, as it always does in politics, came via human error and technology. Under the pretext of cybersecurity for the campaign, I hired a former intelligence agent, a man named Cicero, who specialized in digital forensics. I asked him to install a new firewall and monitoring system across our entire network, including the personal devices we used for work, including Sean's. For 2 weeks, nothing. I was already starting to feel guilty, the paranoid woman Sean would claim I was. And then Cicero called me to a meeting at an anonymous coffee shop far from campaign headquarters. He said nothing. He just handed me a tablet. On the screen, a call log from a burner phone, dozens of calls to a single contact, saved as JM, and the location history of the burner phone which matched Sean's schedule perfectly. But the final blow was the bank transfer records. Small deposits, always under the $10,000 limit to avoid suspicion, made in cash at different ATMs, to an account in the name of a ghost consulting firm, and from that account, withdrawals and payments for luxury hotels and a leased apartment in a posh neighborhood. I cross-referenced the number for JM with contacts from the rival campaign, Cicero said, his voice neutral. It belongs to Joanna Miller, their deputy campaign manager. The world tilted under my feet. Joanna, an ambitious, aggressive strategist, known for her ruthless pragmatism. I knew her. We had faced off in other elections. There's more, Cicero continued, swiping the screen. I installed a keylogger on his laptop. He accessed our strategy server last night, and he downloaded one file. The file name appeared on the screen, and my heart stopped. Dossier, October, Final, Confidential. It was our secret weapon, the October surprise, a complete dossier with irrefutable documentary evidence linking the rival candidate to a corruption scheme in a public works bid when he was governor. It was devastating. It was the end of the race, and Sean had delivered it. He wasn't just having an affair. He was committing treason at the highest level. He was selling my strategy, my work, the future of our candidate. For money, for resentment, for the thrill of feeling powerful, of being the double agent at the center of the game? Maybe all of it. In that coffee shop, the betrayed wife wept internally. But the political strategist, the general I was, began to draw the lines of a new battle. A battle no one would see coming. Sean thought he was a spy. He didn't know he was about to become bait. And the trap I would set for him would make our October surprise look like child's play. If you can already feel the adrenaline of the war room and the cold sting of political betrayal, subscribe to the channel. Julia's revenge will be a masterstroke of strategy, and you won't want to miss it. I returned home that night with a shard of ice where my heart used to be. The apartment, once a refuge from the chaos of the campaign, now felt like the enemy's den. Sean was in the living room, reading a book, the picture of tranquility. He looked up at me over his glasses. "Tough night?" he asked with that rehearsed tone of concern. "Just the usual. The final push. You know how it is." I went to the bar and poured myself a whiskey, my hands steady. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to accuse. A general doesn't show her weapons before the final battle. Instead, I was going to test his defenses. "Sean, I need your opinion," I said, sitting in the armchair across from him. "It's about the dossier. The October surprise." He put down his book, a barely disguised glint of interest in his eyes. It was the prey listening to the hunter describe the trap. "Of course, my love. What is it?" "I'm having a strategic doubt. The dossier is strong, very strong. It proves he knew about the corruption scheme in the subway bid. But what if it's too strong?" He frowned. "What do you mean, too strong?" "Think about it," I continued, swirling the ice in my glass. "We drop it at the debate. He has no way to defend himself. The media destroys him. We win. But what then? Such a landslide victory, based on such a huge scandal, could create an institutional crisis. It might look like we used a low blow, a silver bullet. Maybe it weakens Franklin's mandate before he even starts." Maybe the electorate resents such a negative campaign. I was presenting him with a classic strategic dilemma, one we would have discussed on any other night, but this time, every word was a carefully crafted lie. I saw the gears turning in his mind. He wasn't thinking as my husband, he was thinking as Joanna Miller's informant. If he convinced me not to use the dossier, he would save her candidate and still look like a prudent advisor to me. If he encouraged me to use it, he would have the final confirmation that the weapon was real and ready to be fired. "That's an interesting point, Julia," he said, pondering, the actor playing his best role. "You're right to worry about governability. Maybe there's a more subtle way. Use only part of the dossier, leak a section to the press instead of using it at the debate, create a narrative of doubt instead of one of accusation." Bingo! He wasn't trying to stop me. He was trying to modulate the attack, to control the damage for the other side. He was advising me on the best way to be betrayed by him. "No," I said with a sudden conviction. "On second thought, the risk is necessary. We have to go all in. It's our only chance to secure a decisive victory. We'll use everything at the debate. No mercy." I saw a flash of triumph in his eyes, quick as lightning. He thought he had won. He thought he had manipulated me into following the plan he had already leaked. "If you're sure, my love," he said with false resignation, "I trust your instincts. You're the best at what you do." "I know," I replied, taking a sip of my whiskey. The liquid burned on its way down, but the coldness inside me was greater. "Sean, I need a favor. The final dossier file is encrypted. I'm going to give you the password. I need you to put it on a secure thumb drive and deliver it personally to Franklin tomorrow morning. Only to him. No one else can have access." "Of course, Julia. Consider it done. Maximum security," he replied, already standing, eager to get the file in his hands. "The password is Integrity 2024, I said, looking him in the eyes. "Easy to remember, don't you think?" He smiled, oblivious to the venomous irony. He didn't know that the file I would give him wasn't the real dossier. It was a modified version, a bait. And he, my husband, my partner, my betrayer, would be the messenger of his own destruction. The next morning, the atmosphere at campaign headquarters was electric. Everyone could feel that victory was in the air. I handed Sean a sealed thumb drive. "Here's the dossier. Remember, for Franklin's hands only." He nodded, his expression serious, but his eyes were shining with the thrill of betrayal. I watched him leave and get into the car, and I knew his first stop wouldn't be Franklin's committee, but a clandestine meeting with Joanna Miller. What he didn't know was that I had already met with Franklin the night before, in secret. I had told him everything: Sean's betrayal, the leak, the plan that was now in motion. Franklin, a decent man, was shocked and furious. "We have to fire him, expose him, Julia," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "We're going to use him." The thumb drive Sean was carrying did not contain our real dossier. Cicero, my security expert, and I had spent the entire night creating a masterpiece of disinformation, the bait dossier. It was perfect. It looked real. It had the same format, the same tone. It cited companies, dates, amounts. It accused the rival candidate, Brolin, of the same crime, corruption in a public works bid. But all the central details were fake. The companies cited were shell corporations we had created in offshore havens. The bank documents were brilliant forgeries with account numbers that led to dead ends. The witnesses cited were fictitious. It was a plausible story of corruption, but one that would disintegrate under the slightest serious scrutiny. It was the most beautiful trap I had ever built. While Sean was delivering the bait to the enemy, I initiated the second part of my plan, the smokescreen. I gathered my communications team. "Change of plans," I announced, to everyone's shock. "The dossier is too risky. We're pulling back. The focus for the final debate will be positive. Our proposals, our vision for the future. No attacks." My aides protested.
Julia, we're 8 points ahead. It's time to step on their throats, my communications chief said. I decide the strategy here, I replied with a coldness that ended the discussion. And the strategy is to be proactive. I want the press to know we are adopting a more presidential tone. No more mudslinging. The news spread like wildfire. Franklin campaign adopts conciliatory tone in the final stretch, the headlines read. It was the perfect move to lull the rival campaign. They had our dossier, our silver bullet, and now they saw us backing down, afraid to use it. It would make them arrogant. It would make them believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that the information they held was real and exclusive. That night, Sean came home with a bouquet of flowers, the first in years. I was thinking about what you said, he said, with a sincerity that made me nauseous. About governability, about the tone of the campaign. You made the right decision, Julia, the wisest one. He was congratulating me for falling into his trap, unaware that he was dancing in the center of mine. Thank you, darling, I said, accepting the flowers. It's good to know I can count on you. The smokescreen was in place, the bait had been taken. Now all that was left was to wait for the big fish, hungry for an easy victory, to swallow the hook whole in the final debate. And I knew he would. In politics, arrogance is always the most voracious appetite. The 2 days leading up to the debate were the longest of my career. I was living a double life. In public, I was the strategist who had opted for a softer approach, talking about building bridges and uniting the country. I took criticism from analysts and even allies who accused me of taking my foot off the gas and losing my killer instinct. I absorbed it all in silence, letting the narrative set. Behind the scenes, however, I was at war. My real war room was no longer the campaign headquarters, which I knew was compromised by Sean's betrayal. It was a small, anonymous office rented by Cicero, my security expert. Only I, Cicero, and Franklin, our candidate, had access. Cicero was a ghost, a man of few words but of absolute loyalty. He had worked intelligence missions in conflict zones. To him, Sean's betrayal wasn't a marital drama. It was an unacceptable breach of protocol. The amateur, Cicero would mutter as he tracked Sean's digital footsteps. He's using the same burner phone for 3 months, and he always meets the deputy campaign manager at the same hotel. He's not a spy. He's a vain idiot.
Cicero's loyalty was professional, almost cold, but Franklin's loyalty was what gave me strength. In our first secret meeting, after I revealed everything, he looked at me, not with pity, but with deep respect. "Julia, I owe my career to you. Twice," he said. "If you tell me to jump, I ask from what height. What do you need me to do?" "I need you to trust me," I replied. "On the debate stage, you will follow my positive script. You will talk about proposals, about the future. And when they attack you with the dossier, you will look shocked, surprised, and you will deny everything, but not with anger, with a quiet disappointment. You will say that you regret the campaign has sunk to this level of lies." "But what about our real dossier?" he asked. "The real dossier is our safety net. It will be released to the press independently 30 minutes after they launch their sham. Our attack won't be an accusation. It will be a devastating confirmation coming from an outside source at the exact moment their credibility is in ruins." It was a high-stakes strategy. It relied on the opponent's arrogance, Franklin's discipline, and perfect timing. The other piece of my fortress was more subtle. It was Maria, my personal assistant for over 10 years. A quiet woman, invisible to most, but who saw and heard everything. She was the guardian of my life, and her loyalty was unshakable. On the eve of the debate, I called her to the secret office. "Maria, I need a favor. This is the address of the flat where Sean meets Joanna Miller," I said, handing her a piece of paper. "I know he's going there after he leaves our house tomorrow, saying he's going to a final meeting. I want you to be there, not to confront him, just to deliver an envelope." "What envelope, Julia?" she asked,
her eyes firm on mine. I pulled a plain manila envelope from my briefcase. Inside, there were no documents, no evidence. There was only a copy of our apartment key and the wedding band Sean had given me 20 years ago. Give this to him in front of her and say only one sentence. Julia asked me to return what no longer has any value. I instructed, and then walk away. It wasn't a strategic move for the campaign. It was for me. It was my final act of personal liberation. While I was setting the trap that would destroy Sean's public life, I also needed to close the door on our private one. Maria, with her silent loyalty, would be the executor of that final intimate blow. While the rival campaign, intoxicated by the information they thought they had, prepared their bombshell attack, I was solidifying my defenses, not with lies, but with the only thing that truly matters in a war, the unquestionable loyalty of the few people you can trust with your life. The trap is set and the stage is ready. If you want to see how the country's top political strategist executes her revenge in the final debate, make sure you're subscribed. The October surprise is coming, and it's not the one anyone expects. The television studio felt like a Roman arena. The lights were hot, the cameras silent predators. Millions of people were watching. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable electricity. I was in the control room, watching dozens of monitors, my heart beating at a controlled rhythm. Sean was beside me in the guest area, tense, but with a glint of excitement in his eyes. He thought he was about to witness my triumph, not knowing he was there to watch his own execution. The first 60 minutes of the debate followed our script. Franklin was calm, presidential, talking about the economy, healthcare, education. Brolin, the opposing candidate, seemed impatient, almost frustrated by our lack of aggression. He was waiting for the opportunity to use the silver bullet that Joanna and Sean had given him. And then the moment came. In his final statement, Brolin looked directly into the camera, his expression grave, his voice full of rehearsed fury.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I wish I could spend this evening talking about proposals, but my opponent's campaign, despite its false tone of conciliation, has prepared a dirty trick, a low blow. But we found out, and I will not wait for them to launch their lies. I will expose the truth now." I saw Sean lean forward in his chair, his knuckles white. His moment had arrived. "We have received a dossier with documentary evidence," Brolin continued, holding up a paper folder with dramatic flair, "that proves my opponent, Franklin, while he was governor, was directly involved in a corruption scheme to favor the construction company, Andre and Sons, in the subway bidding process. We have bank statements, emails, records of secret meetings." He began to read the details from our bait dossier, the names of the shell companies, the amounts, the dates. It all sounded real, shocking. In the control room, my aides looked at me, pale, confused. They didn't understand. They thought we had backed down. On stage, Franklin looked genuinely shocked. He shook his head, an expression of deep disappointment on his face. When Brolin finished, triumphant, the moderator turned to Franklin. "Candidate Franklin, you have 2 minutes to respond to these very serious allegations." Franklin took a deep breath. "Moderator, I am shocked. Not by the allegations, which are a complete fiction, a lie from start to finish. I am shocked at the level this campaign has sunk to. To use forged documents to create such a vile narrative? This isn't politics. This is desperation." "Forged?" Brolin laughed, scornfully. "We have the proof. Andre and Sons is a real company." "Yes, it is," Franklin said calmly, "and by a remarkable coincidence, the president of Andre and Sons, Mr. Andre himself, is here tonight, and he would like to clarify that his company lost the subway bid at the time and that he has never met me in his life." The camera cut to a man in the audience who stood up. It was the real Mr. Andre, an ally of ours positioned there for the final blow. Brolin's expression faltered. But I wasn't done yet.
In the control room, I gave Cicero a nod. At that exact moment, the phones of every journalist in the press room vibrated simultaneously, an email sent from a secure anonymous source. The subject, the real dossier, the proof of Brolin's corruption. It was our real dossier, the genuine article, with the authentic documents, the real bank accounts, the verifiable witnesses, all about Brolin's actual corruption scheme when he was governor. As the journalist opened the email, their eyes widening in shock, I took out my own phone. I sent a single text message to the burner phone Cicero had given me, a clone of Sean's number. The message was for Joanna Miller, but I knew Sean would see it. He took the bait. Congratulations. Final payment has been deposited. Use the back door. I looked at Sean through the glass of the control room. He took out his phone, read the message, and a smile of relief and greed spread across his face. He thought he had won. He thought he was a genius. It was then that the moderator, who had just received the information in his earpiece, turned to Brolin. Candidate Brolin, we have just received a second dossier from an anonymous source with documents that appear to implicate you in the exact same type of scheme you just accused your opponent of. Would you care to comment? Brolin's world collapsed on live television, in front of millions, and Sean's world, though he didn't know it yet, had disintegrated right along with it. He wasn't a double agent, he was a pawn, and his king had just been checkmated. What followed the debate was not a political victory. It was an annihilation. Brolin's campaign imploded within hours. Their attempt to use a fake dossier, followed by the revelation of our real one, painted them not just as corrupt, but as incompetent amateurs. It was a 1-2 punch from which they never recovered. Franklin won the election by a historic margin.
My victory, however, was quieter and more complex. That same night, while our committee celebrated in euphoria, I went home. The apartment was empty. Sean didn't come back. He didn't need to. I had already changed the locks. 2 days later, the full story was leaked, orchestrated by Cicero. Not about my marriage, but about the espionage. A news site published a detailed story about how the Brolin campaign had been duped by a dishonest internal source who sold them a fake dossier. The article didn't name Sean, only describing him as a low-level operator who, in his vanity, had fallen into a counterintelligence trap. Joanna Miller, the deputy campaign manager, was publicly fired and became the scapegoat for her team's incompetence. Her career in politics was over. Sean was destroyed without my name ever being publicly associated with his. He, who dreamed of being the secret player at the center of it all, was publicly defined as an irrelevant pawn, a useful idiot. For a man driven by ego, it was a punishment worse than prison. Our divorce was handled by lawyers. He didn't contest. He couldn't. I had the bank records, the proof of betrayal. He signed everything, gave up any claim to my assets, and disappeared, taking with him only the dirty money he had received for his treason. A year later, I was in Washington, D.C., but not in a campaign war room. I was President Franklin's chief of staff, one of the most powerful women in the country. The work was brutal, the pressure immense, but it was different. I was no longer building one man's image. I was helping to build a government. My voice was no longer whispered behind the scenes. It was heard at the table where decisions were made. I never heard from Joanna again. As for Sean, I learned from an old acquaintance that he had tried to use the money to start a risk consultancy firm in Miami. It went bankrupt in 6 months. The last I heard, he was selling luxury real estate to foreign buyers, using what was left of his charm to get by. The man who managed my life now managed viewings of empty apartments. One evening, working late at the White House, President Franklin walked into my office. We were exhausted, dealing with a crisis in Congress. "Do you ever get tired, Julia?" he asked with a weary smile. I looked at the papers spread across my desk, at the laws, the projects, the challenges. "I've discovered that strategy is more rewarding when you're fighting for something bigger than just a win," I replied. He nodded, understanding the weight of my words. He was a fool. He had the best strategist in the country by his side, and he traded you for nothing. "No," I corrected, a small smile forming on my lips.
He didn't trade me, he freed me. And it was true. Sean's betrayal, as painful as it was the catalyst that forced me out of the shadows I had chosen for myself. He tried to steal my victory, not realizing that, in doing so, he gave me a far greater one. He gave me my own career, my own name, my own story. The revenge, in the end, wasn't about his fall. It was about my rise. And from the ashes of that marriage, I had finally emerged, not as someone else's general, but as the commander of my own destiny. Julia's journey shows that the best strategy is always the truth. If stories of intelligence and justice like this inspire you, your first action is to leave a like so YouTube knows you enjoy our content. If you're not yet part of our community, subscribe to the Revenge of Victoria channel for more immersive narratives like this, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. And finally, a special request. We want to know how far our stories travel. Comment below and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love reading every single comment. Take care and see you in the next video.